Industrial relations, employee-employee relations have come to a decisive point in Sri Lanka, especially after the end of the conflict. It's been nearly 3 years for the end of the conflict, and how has the labor relations in Sri Lanka really taken a foot? To discuss about all this and more, we have with us this evening Mr. Ravi Paris, Director General of the Employees Federation of Ceylon. A very good evening and welcome to this First in Focus.
Thank you.
Starting off, Mr. Paris, tell me, your organization has been established in the island since 1929, one of the oldest trade unions in Sri Lanka. What has been the role of the EFC over the last few decades in the island?
Well, I think the EFC primarily was set up as an offshoot of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce in 1929, when it was felt that there has to be a separate organization to handle industrial relations issues. Because this was a time that the Sri Lankan workers were basically uprising against the British rulers in terms of their rulers in the government as well as their rulers in their enterprises. So they thought that there has to be some specialized institution which has to be set up to resolve disputes and advise employers, and that is how the Employees Federation came to be. And the first collective agreement dates back to 1929, when the EFC signed this collective agreement with the union of the famous A.E. Gunasinghe, who is regarded as one of the labor leaders of Ceylon. Ever since then, the EFC has taken a very responsible role as an advisory body to employers. Why I say responsible role is that we have always advised employers to be compliant with the laws, to be compliant with labor standards. And that is the basis on which we take in employers to our membership. And we are very clear about it. But at the same time, once they are in our membership, we are totally employer focused when we try to look into the interests of employers.
Has the EFC been successful over the years, especially let's take into account the last 2 decades or so? Have you all been successful to promote employee-employee relations over the last few years, especially the last 2 decades alone?
I'm happy that you have asked me a very important question. When you said last 2 decades, it makes matters very easy for me because it's exactly 2 decades after I have joined the EFC. In terms of statistics, let me say this. In 1992, the time that I joined, the EFC was working with a professional staff of 8, including the CEO. And there the membership was around 150 to 200 maximum. Today, after 2 decades, we are working with a professional staff of 25 and a membership over 550. So those are statistics. I know statistics merely doesn't say much, but obviously people would join us because of some reason. Because it is not just a membership where you don't pay anything. There's substantial payment involved and there's value for money. So I think in terms of membership we have grown and employers have had faith in us, and we continue to press for the rights of employers. Why I say rights of employers is that I think the time has come for us to look at the rights of employers, because we always talk of rights of workers, which is good. We are not an organization which is promoting hire and fire, but there needs to be a balance, because there has to be a basis of equity where the rights of workers are also looked upon in terms of looking at rights of employers.
Mr. Paris, I just want to interrupt you for a second there. Now, you just mentioned to me earlier that you have joined the EFC 2 decades ago, and it is apt for me to ask that question because you would know the transformation very clearly. I want to know, since the last 2 decades, let's take into account the last 2 decades alone, what laws have you all been able to implement, brought forward during the last 2 decades to promote the relations between the employee and the employer?
Well, as an organization, we do not always be reliant on changes of law, although we always strive for it, because that is something beyond our control, because the policy makers have to make the changes. We can only make submissions, and that is what we have been doing. And in fact, it was just few months ago that we just a month ago that we had a media conference subsequent to a survey that we conducted on the impact of labor laws on generation of employment, where 91% of the employers who have responded to this survey say that labor laws in our country are a hindrance to employment generation. So nothing much has been done in terms of changes in the labor laws, but I must say a lot of things have been done in promoting good industrial
Have you all
relations.
been able to, Mr. Paris, to have a dialogue with the government in respect of these archaic laws that is in existence in the industrial sector of this island? Have you all been able to have a dialogue with them?
Oh yes,
respect?
very much. We've been able to have a dialogue with them, and I am happy to say that in respect of one area, we have been able to make some impact and we have got some relaxation, especially with regard to the 5-day week work arrangement. And I think it is important to say that in the context of the May Day, because the May Day is commemorated to remember the 8-hour working day. And here what we asked the government was to relax the laws, to allow employers who work on 5.5 days to work on 5 days and work the same amount of working hours that you work on 5.5 days. In other words, the spread over the working hours of Saturday over Monday to Friday without any additional payment. So that needs a change of legislation. And through a lot of effort on our part, making submissions and lobbying it at the National Labour Advisory Council, now at the moment we have got some temporary relief, and temporary approvals are being given to factories to work on that basis. So I think that is quite an achievement, because we have very limited power in terms of changing regulations.
But you all do have a dialogue
Of course
constantly
we have. We have
with the
every month.
ministry.
Every month there is this body called the National Labour Advisory Council, where representatives of trade unions, representative of employers, and I am a member of the NLAC. So that is one of the ways in which we express our views. But more than anything else, we do write to the minister and lobby with them whenever there is an issue in terms of industrial relations, and we do that on behalf of all employees, not only our members.
Mr. Paris, there is a notion within the community, within the labour community in this island, that the EFC only lobbies for the rights of the employers and not the employees. Is this notion really correct?
Well, I must say that our foremost interest is to look after the interest of the employer, but, as I told you, in a responsible manner. And in doing so, I can very, very well tell you, with a lot of responsibility, that it is not quite correct. The best example that I can give you is the time that the government was promoting a pensions bill. Now this was being promoted, and that is the time that the trade unions and the EFC both got together and said that we are not for it. And the EFC very, very clearly said that we are not against the concept. We are not against the concept, and we thought that the bill itself was something that should not be implemented because it was not the best for us and the workers. So that is where we got together with the workers for the interest of the workers. So there again another important proposal that we have made, especially taking into account the industrial relations aspect, because whatever proposals we make, we look at the national interest and the industrial relations aspect, and that is what is important today, because very often the unions have the perception that whatever proposals we made at EFC are ones which is only employer oriented. It is not so. In fact, I'm very happy that you asked this question, because some other main proposals we have made for labour reform will not affect employees' rights. It will only enable more employees to get into employment. I'll just give you an example. One of the proposals we have made is to make some changes to the Shop and Office Employees Act to enable women to work in the night in offices. This is already happening, I know, because the BPO industry has come in a big way. But we need to have enabling legislation which provides for it. So this is nothing alarming. There's nothing alarming about it, because this provides employment for women. And I don't think the unions also will have any objection to it. But we have made proposals, still nothing has happened.
Mr. Paris, we have to go for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about more on the relations between employers, and what has the EFC done to promote these relations in the island. All this and more after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. Our guest this evening is Mr. Ravi Paris, the Director General of the Employees Federation of Ceylon. Mr. Paris, before going for a short commercial break, we were talking about the role played by the EFC to promote the employee-employee relations in the island. However, I want to drag your attention to the 1999 amendment that was brought forth to the Industrial Disputes Act. However, your organization is now lobbying to revoke this amendment and move into a new piece of legislation. Why is this?
Thank you for asking me this question, because I think it's very important that the public should be aware of our reasons. The Amendment 56 of 99 was introduced just before the presidential elections in 99 in December, at a time when employers and workers were having discussions on something called the Workers' Charter. Now they wanted our proposals as well, and we were looking at strengthening collective bargaining and also strengthening freedom of association, but on a fair basis. A lot of complaints were made during that time that certain employers were openly flouting these labor standards, and therefore the unions wanted certain unfair labor practices recognized. And at the same time, the employers also wanted certain unfair labor practice on the part of employees recognized. Because if you can remember, it was in the 1990s that some of the employees used to climb up water towers and demand for compensation. Fortunately, that culture has gone. So during that time when these discussions were made, suddenly this amendment came through without anything for the employers.
This is just before the presidential election, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right, just before the presidential election. And this particular piece of legislation is discriminatory of employers, because it only highlights the unfair labor practices on the part of employers and nothing on the part of workers. It also has a very significant feature, because it compels employers to bargain with trade unions or worker organizations which has more than 40% representation. Now we have been always doing that. Collective bargaining, the EFC from the inception, before this law came into being, we were adopting that practice. But through this legislation, collective bargaining became mandatory. Now if you look at the ILO convention number 98, it is very, very clear that collective bargaining between employers and worker organizations and trade unions must be voluntary. The voluntariness is a basic concept in collective bargaining. So then again, this piece of legislation is contrary to the ILO convention itself. So as a result, this piece of legislation, although it was mooted and brought in to strengthen trade unions, to recognize trade unions, today the trade unions have themselves conceded that it hasn't done much, and they want more regulation on it.
So do you mean to say, Mr. Paris, that